So great. Welcome everyone to our third meeting, our policy meeting of the Salem project. Today we are focusing on economic development and employment. I'm Eunice Kim, a long-range planning manager for the city of Salem. And with me today are Austin and Seth. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Sure, I'm Austin Ross, long-range planner with the city of Salem.
Hi, Seth Leonard. I'm with the Economic Development Division in the city of Salem. And my boss, Annie Gorski, should be showing up here too at some point, but if she doesn't get a chance to introduce herself, she's with our group too.
Great, thank you. So today we're focusing on policies, and I'm going to start with kind of a brief overview of the Salem project to make sure we're all kind of on the same page of what we're doing here and where we are in the process. And then the meeting really is split into three different sections. The first one is about policies that we have previously drafted during the visioning phase of this process. That was the last 1.5 to 2 years of outreach that we did throughout the community. And those were included in the vision document that went to the council in March. And then the second section is going to be new policy ideas that we've researched in other communities. And so we'll present those ideas. And then the last section is really your ideas. So throughout this presentation, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. As a reminder, we are going to make the chat available to the public by posting it on our project website. That was a request that we received recently. So we're going to do that for all of the chats and all the meetings. And you'll be able to watch these presentations online on our YouTube channel. So they're all there as well. So just as a reminder, the Salem project is a multi-year project to update our comprehensive plan. So again, that's the large framework that guides our growth and development in the next 10, 20, 30 years. It includes goals, policies, and a map that really, again, guide that growth in the future. Hopefully you've all seen this map before. This map shows city limits in the black dashed outline, and then the gray area is our portion of the urban growth boundary. This is the area that we're planning for in the comprehensive plan, and it's the area that when you hear people talking about 60,000 more people by 2035, it's this gray area. So it's beyond city limits. It includes unincorporated areas of Marion and Polk County. So where are we in this project? We took our vision to the council in March and asked for acceptance. So that vision document was pretty high level. It included a bunch of goals across a variety of topics, as well as a proposed map. And so we brought that to council and asked them, are we headed in the right direction? Will you accept this vision? And they did. And so now we're really diving into the details to really support that vision with detailed policies, zoning code changes, and zoning map changes. Today's meeting is focused on policies, but we're doing outreach on all the other parts of the plan, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So again, this is our third meeting. We've had our meeting on community engagement and equity and on housing, and now we're turning our attention to economic development and employment. Each week we're having these meetings on Wednesday, both at noon and at 5:30. The material is the same, so you're welcome to come to both, but you won't be missing anything if you come to one versus the other. And our goal is to have these every week through the end of May. So like I mentioned earlier, the meeting today, or the presentation, is really in 3 sections. And for each section, we're going to present different policy ideas, and then we're going to get your input live. So we're using kind of new technology through voting, both either on your phone by text or on a web browser on your computer or a web browser on your phone. And then feel free to, again, ask questions in the chat. Sometimes we'll ask for clarification, and you can unmute and speak. So we do want this to be interactive. So because it's new technology, we've added this kind of practice poll. If you can all go to your phone or web browser, or you can go to the chat, and there's a link that shall be put in there to click on the website, or you can text Eunice Kim 345 to the number 22333. If you're texting on your phone, you should get something back that says you've joined Eunice Kim's session or something like that. And then the questions will pop up as we go through each idea, and then you can give your answer. And then the question should change automatically, so you don't need to refresh your screen or refresh your phone. And so we're going to try it out as a practice on the next slide.
Can we quickly say that one more time so our person on the phone has
Sure.
that name to text and the number to text it to, or the web address, because they probably can't see it?
Sure. So the web address is pollev.com/EuniceKim345. Or if you want to use the text function, go ahead, Austin.
347.
Oh, 347, thank you. If you want the text function, instead of texting to a phone number, you can text to the number 22333. And what you want to put in the text is EuniceKim347, all one word. And feel free to let us know if it's not working or you're having some challenges, and we can try to troubleshoot. Oh, people are already doing it. Okay. So are you ready? Is everyone ready? Put in an answer. Looks like people are doing okay. And you can change your answer if you just notice that. Okay, it looks like it's going okay. Again, feel free to jump in, let us know if you're having challenges. Austin, do you want to move on?
Sure. I think for this presentation, those might have been some old responses from last week, but I think our magic number for this presentation is going to be 16. So that's how we'll know that everybody has responded-ish. Does that make sense?
Sure. Do you want to refresh it then and see if the 21 number is accurate?
I think if you're having trouble, drop us a note in the chat and we'll troubleshoot it. Otherwise, let's keep going.
Great. So this is our vision statement from the vision document that we brought to council last month. And it represents really the shared priorities that we've heard throughout our outreach in the community about what Salem wants to be in the future. And one of those things that we heard pretty loud and clear is that it's really important that our local businesses as well as our families are thriving. And so I just wanted to point that out, that's our high-level vision statement that we're supporting with our goals and policies. There's a lot of other work going on related to economic development that we just wanted to touch on. There's an economic development strategy that urban development, and Seth and Annie could probably talk to this better, are working on really on short-term actions. And then the Salem strategic plan was just adopted also by the city council, and it has a section just on strong and diverse economy. And then the climate action plan is ongoing as well. And that has to do with obviously greenhouse gas emissions and resiliency, and ties into development and economic development. So we're collaborating with all of these ongoing projects as we do the Our Salem project. So if you have specific questions about these, feel free to let us know, and we can jump in. So these are the broad goals that we have for economic development and employment that, again, were in the vision document. And you'll see that they're very high level. It's about strengthening the economy, having enough land for the type of employment needs we have going forward, increasing access to jobs and services, having great design, and then training. So while these are very high level, the goal of today is to really dive into the details of what policies should we have to ensure that these goals are reached and to really push forward towards implementation. So I'm going to hand it over now to Austin.
Thanks, Eunice. So we're going to start by going through some previously drafted policies. As Eunice mentioned, these are policies that were drafted during the previous phase of the project. They come from input that we got from the community. So we were hearing a lot of new ideas during that earlier visioning process, and we wanted to make sure we got those down so that people knew we were listening. So the goal here is really to test those ideas. We're not trying to wordsmith them right now. And so these ideas were presented in vision that council accepted. And if you'd like to go see the exact wording that was in there, you're welcome to do so on the project website. But most of these ideas here are summarized from that. So again, trying to focus on the idea, not the wording. There are several groups of ideas. And so what we're asking you to do is vote on whether you like each idea. You'll be able to vote for multiple options in each group of ideas. And so we're just asking, do you like these ideas? If yes, select them. And then it's important to remember, this is a small sample of the total number of ideas that we've presented. And so again, you can look at that full list and get all the wording on the project website. This is just a summary of important ones that we wanted to share. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them into the chat, or if you're on the phone, feel free to unmute at the end of any section and ask a question, and we'll do our best to address them. And then it's important to remember that there are some details in the language that are important. So when we use words like encourage or promote, that's referring primarily to an incentive, not a mandate. If you see the word require, then that would be a mandate. So we've had some people wondering in previous meetings about what meant what exactly. And so encourage and promote are incentives, not mandates. All right, so let's get into the first set of questions. These ones are all about our economic development goal. So the first one, diversity, I'm going to try and explain them broadly so that people understand them, and especially for our person who's on the phone who may not be able to see them. So this first one is about diversity, having a diverse economy and encouraging a range of businesses and industries. So that helps us to have a strong economy and a resilient economy as well. The next one is about home businesses and encouraging and allowing them more broadly in the community. We heard a lot of people say that they do want that flexibility, whether they're starting a business or as the economy changes, especially during the pandemic, allowing that flexibility to support our local business people. The next one's about displacement and looking at strategies and programs to minimize displacement, especially involuntary displacement of existing businesses due to increased land values. So that might mean rents are going up, and how do we make sure that we aren't losing businesses because of that. And then the fourth one is about enhancing Salem's downtown as a regional destination and a mixed use center. So we'll jump over to the poll. And like I said, you're voting for the ones that you like. You can vote for all of them or several of them. You don't have to vote for just one. So we'll give folks a couple of minutes here. And if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat for us.
Austin, for the person on the phone, do you want to read it and then tell them the letters that they need to text for which?
Sure, yeah. So diverse economy is the letter A. Home businesses is the letter B. Preventing displacement would be the letter C. And supporting downtown as a regional center would be the letter D. I'm still seeing some votes trickle in. We'll give it another couple seconds here. All right, let's keep going. So the next group is about land supply. So the first topic under land supply is emerging industries. And so that's accommodating new technologies and industries as the economy changes. And in order to do that, we would make sure we were providing a variety of lot sizes and settings for different commercial and industrial land uses. After that, we have a policy about brownfields. And so that's about cleaning up, assessing brownfield sites. So those are pieces of land that may have been contaminated in the past, and cleaning those up to make them developable and to help protect the environment. And then the next one on this page is about the Willamette River and encouraging a mix of waterfront uses and trying to revitalize our waterfront while protecting the natural and scenic qualities of the land. So there's only 3 in this group, and we'll jump to the poll here. So supporting emerging industries is the letter A. Brownfield cleanup and redevelopment is the letter B. And the Willamette River is the letter C. It looks like people are getting the hang of this. That's great to see. All right, let's jump over to the next one. So this group is about access and livability. The first policy is about neighborhood hubs. So that's the idea of allowing small scale shops and services within existing neighborhoods to support access to daily needs. Things like potentially coffee shops or a barber, something like that within existing neighborhoods. And so it's the policy itself is supporting the creation of neighborhood hubs to improve local access and daily goods and services. The next one is about access to childcare. So one thing we've heard is that a lot of people would appreciate if we allowed childcare more broadly in Salem. So the locations where that's possible in order to support working parents and people who provide childcare for a living. So a policy about allowing that more broadly. After that is transit-oriented development, which is about encouraging more dense pedestrian-friendly mixed-use development along our corridors with frequent transit. So that would be tying higher intensity development to our major transit corridors, including the Chariot's core network, to make sure that our density was supported by that transit. Development impacts is the last one in this group, and it is about mitigating any off-site impacts of business and industry. So that could be noise, odor, vibration, that sort of stuff. And this is something typically we already do, but it would be making it an official city policy. So let's jump over to the poll on this one. Go ahead and vote, everybody. The neighborhood hub policy is A, access to childcare is B, transit-oriented development is C, and minimizing and mitigating development impacts is D. And I'm not seeing many other changes in this one, so let's keep going. I think this is our last group of previously drafted policies, and it's about design as well as workforce and training. So the first policy in this group is about pedestrian-friendly design, and that's encouraging commercial and mixed-use development to incorporate pedestrian-friendly designs, whether that's buildings that address the sidewalk and are up close to that, or additional pedestrian connections through parking lots, things like that. Community amenities is about encouraging mixed use and commercial developments to incorporate amenities like a community meeting space or community gardens, things that can support a strong community and business people within it, or that sort of thing. So after that is training. So this is about supporting job training programs, career and technical schools, and multilingual workforce programs. And then the final one in this group is about opportunity. So that's incentivizing businesses to hire locally and provide educational opportunities to their employees. So the poll on this one, pedestrian friendly design would be A, community amenities within commercial and mixed use development would be B. Supporting job training programs would be C. And promoting and incentivizing employment opportunity would be D.
Hey, Austin, we do have a request to go back to the slide while voting so people can read the descriptions again. So I don't know if we're able to go back and forth.
I think we can.
Okay.
You're welcome. I think we have to jump to the poll first, and then I can come back so that you can see it, and the poll should stay live. All right, so let's see where we are on the results here. Looks like most people have voted. And so let's keep going. If you guys have any other questions or comments about these policies, feel free to add them to the chat. Or if you're on the phone, feel free to unmute and share. And I'll give everybody a minute or so because I know it takes a little bit of time to type in a question if that's what you're doing.
Austin, this is Zach at CV2 Architects. I had a thought that came up about the, I guess it's business hubs you were calling it in the communities or neighborhood hubs.
Yeah.
And you were talking about creating opportunities for there to be businesses that provide just daily goods and services. What does that mean here? Does it mean just kind of groceries or coffee shops, or does it also mean like healthcare, mental health services, or does it depend on the neighborhood too?
That's a good question. So then to create neighborhood hubs, we would create a new zoning designation. And it would allow things like retail uses, services. I think we're also including some community services like medical centers or social services, because we really do want to make sure that it's helping people meet their daily needs. And I think we have an overview of what would potentially be included in that new zone on the project website. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. And if you want to talk more about those specific uses, we're happy to chat about that in addition to this meeting. Eunice, do you have anything to add?
I was just going to say that we're in the process of updating our overview of the neighborhood hub and putting that online. It'll be more detailed than the one that's currently there. But one of the things we did here is that, you know, while some neighborhoods may want like coffee shops and yoga studios, other neighborhoods may be more in need of like social services. And so it is going to be a little bit broader than we first presented based on our input from the community.
I see another question that says there are 24 people at this meeting. Why are only 10 or so voting? Jim, I think there are about 7 staff people in this meeting. So my guess is that staff isn't voting, and then there may be 1 or 2 people who aren't choosing to vote or who don't want to vote for a given topic. So I think that's why you're not seeing a full 24 on the screen there. Another question says, in regards to neighborhood hubs, who would be regulating who goes into the slots or spaces in those hubs? So we wouldn't regulate who went into those spaces, though we would regulate what types of uses would be permitted and the size that those uses could be. So we have a limitation on the amount of square footage that could be dedicated to any business. And then we recognize that some of these hubs might be where there are already existing homes. So there are ways to, you know, convert a home to a business as well. So adaptive reuse would be something we would encourage.
There's a question also about other incentives to support job growth, and maybe I'd ask Seth or Annie if they wanted to jump in there.
I just saw that one. And maybe Annie can take a crack at it too. I think a lot of those incentives, we tend to like work with our partners on in those areas. So for example, like Willamette Workforce Partnership has a number of incentives, including one that they have right now is an incumbent worker program where if you have a full-time staff member, they'll pay for the training of that person to get more skills or to move up to another level. That's one that's coming to mind right now. Annie, are there any others that are coming like top of your mind at this point? I mean, and there's a lot of apprenticeships and programs like that exist too.
Right. In Oregon and in Salem, we have the enterprise zone incentive, which is a 3 to 5 year tax incentive. There's some minimum job and minimum investment qualifications that come with that. That's one. There are some programs through Business Oregon in addition to Willamette Workforce. We're certainly tracking the new stimulus funding and understand through that there may be some additional funds for workforce development, infrastructure, potentially additional business grants. So, and a focus on underserved communities. And so those are, we're always looking, I think, as well, and open to exploring new ideas. But in terms of existing, those are the ones that, at least the main ones that we've mentioned.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So I see one more question related to the hub concept. What happened to the State Street Corridor project? That seems to have dropped it completely, not a priority? Question mark. I think that was actually.
Well, for anyone who knows me knows that it is a priority. Yeah, so we did change the zoning along the State Street Corridor project, and we have applied for and secured funding for 3 pedestrian crossings at 19th, 21st, and 25th Street. We don't have funding currently for the road diet section and street improvement, but there is a lot of funding that's going to be coming our way as a city. And we're looking at State Street as one possible project to fund with all the new sources of funding potentially. So that conversation has just started, but I will be advocating.
I see one more question asking, do any training programs connect to unions? Maybe that's one that Seth could tackle.
Yeah, Chemeketa has, I'm trying to remember the name of that program, but they have like a number of professional tracks that you can take. And a number of those connect into like the union programs at that point too. The name of that program is escaping me at the moment.
And then which high schools are involved in work training?
So there's CTEC, and I believe that, students from any local high school can go to that program. And then the hub that just opened up also, that's going to be opening like the old Toys R Us location. And that's going to be more for like Marion County. Also going to be like a more technical skills related center for high school students.
And then there are also a number of CTE, career technical education programs in the high schools that are not, in a separate facility like CTEC or the Mid-Valley program, which is going to be opening, which Seth referenced. So that's another piece. And then each of those has opportunities for mentorships. And then, so.
Thank you both. There's a question from EM asking, we are a state government and medical services community. What other economic support ideas are being encouraged in the proposed policies? So I'm not entirely sure it's in this presentation, but we do have a new idea about supporting institutional campuses and recognizing their value in this community and looking at ways to support those as employers and as resources for the community. So that's a great point, good question, and it's on our radar. Let's see, one more about, are there any business incentives for green businesses?
Annie, do you want to
So
take
I'm not aware of anything specific. There are that is a program designed or run by the city. Certainly through our urban renewal grant programs, we've expanded the eligibility more recently to ensure that things like solar panels are eligible expenses. But in addition to that, I think, the main incentive that's an existing incentive is through the utility partners. So Energy Trust has their rebate programs, and we are always encouraging businesses, when there is a physical construction component, to explore those and connecting them to those. But that'd be the main one at this point that I'd mentioned.
And I would add that as the climate action plan progresses, if there are any policies that emerge from that support, that would incentivize green businesses and green building, we would be able to incorporate those into our Salem as well.
And we also have a draft policy that was in the vision document related to supporting the growth of basically green businesses, both those who manufacture like energy efficiency or facilitate energy efficiency or use or incorporate that in their buildings currently.
Perfect. And then same question, any incentives that focus on businesses owned by people of color and women?
And again, the answer would be the same in terms of a city program. There isn't anything that we have currently established that has that focus or a separate program or incentive. Certainly everyone is encouraged to apply and is able to apply for those programs. You'll see through our work that we're starting on the economic development strategy. We're looking at ways to try to ensure that our programs are reaching everyone and exploring ways to kind of have help from the community and reviewing our programs to ensure we're meeting all the needs. There are certainly, we participate through the Salem Capital Connections and a couple of other networking groups that are aimed at encouraging businesses or ensuring businesses are aware of some priority contracting opportunities that are available based on classifications such as women and minority-owned business classification. So that's tied to contracting. That's not necessarily a financial incentive.
I'll just add, I think these are all the really great questions that you're asking, Professor Lorenzen, and on top of mind for us. And I think looking into ways to, incorporate these type of incentives into our programming is something that we're certainly considering.
And we could certainly create a policy that's higher level around encouraging these types of businesses generally.
All right, so I think maybe we'll address this one last question that I see in the chat and then we'll keep rolling. There will be other opportunities to include more later in the presentation. So this last one's about whether our current business incentives are mapped and whether there are proportional amounts in North and East Salem. So I think that's getting at how funding for incentives has been distributed, maybe?
And again, that's we're talking about existing programs. Those are in some cases tied to geography. So you can find a map of our enterprise zones online. Happy to put a link here in the chat. Those are specific areas and the state designates criteria for those, and that's based on employment data and some other factors. So those have a geographic focus, and they are in North Salem, they are in Southeast Salem, they are in, near the airport, but generally focused in, West, North, and Southeast. Our urban renewal areas as well are tied to the location. Those again are tied to state criteria around blight an economic need. And those are also, you're also able to find a map of those online. We have grant programs within those areas. And those are also spread throughout the city, including in North Salem.
Thanks, Annie. All right, so we'll keep going here, moving on to some new ideas, and I'm going to turn it over to Seth for that.
Sure. So, as part of our Salem project and part of today, really, what we went through some of the past ideas that that have already been looked at, and then Eunice, Austin, and their team, just to make sure that we weren't missing anything, went through some other plans in the area and looked at some other ideas and basically said, hey, let's at least bring them up in a public space and we can chat about them. So I think we have about 8 different ones, different policy recommendations. I went back into these plans and just did a quick sort of context review so I can add, a 30-second summary kind of what these mean in that area. But the first one was on regulatory climate. So the policy here is ensure development review processes and regulations are predictable and equitable to support local employment and business growth. So I would say that, what this really is saying is evaluating the local review process for cost, speed, clarity, and flexibility. Oregon has a pretty robust regulatory land use system, and that can make developing in the state quite challenging. So I think the point here is ensuring that we have clear guidelines, but also are accommodating to development that can't fit into a rigid box. And then, as we talked about earlier, we're doing an economic development strategy update right now. And in that plan, one of our ideas is to coordinate with planning on efforts to make the permitting process clear for developers and continue to be a city-based resource to local developers on projects. Anyone want to add anything to that? Okay, let's vote.
Seth, just to help out our person who's on the phone, for all of these questions about new ideas, we're asking, is a new policy right for Salem about this topic? And to answer yes, it's A. To answer no, it's B. And C would be if you're unsure. And after each question, if people who are unsure have a reason for that, or if anybody has a reason for the way that they voted, they're welcome to share that in the chat or ask a question.
Great. Okay. Does it do? Seeing one question coming up here. Just a comment: regulatory reform is a two-edged sword. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, if you're looking at, I would say that in general, this policy is more of like a pro-growth policy. It's trying to make development easier. So I guess depending on which side of that sword you think is the sharp one for you, it would impact that. There's a question: are there programs, incentives to offset permitting costs for nonprofits or small businesses that may have a hard time with permitting expenses on top of the building costs they are taking on? I would say specific to the nonprofits or the small businesses, I'm not aware of any. Annie, are you aware? Annie, do you want to jump in on that question?
We have, the city has SDC waivers for if you're building affordable housing, but beyond that, no, I'm not aware of any specific incentives.
This is Tori. I'm with the City of Salem Urban Development as well. our grant programs allow for helping with financial support of some of the soft costs with the project in an urban renewal area.
I like the team effort. Thanks, Tori and Annie jumping in. Are we ready to go to the next one?
Let's go ahead. We'll get to that last question dropped into the chat after this policy.
Okay, so the next one is on economic resilience. So this is improve economic resilience to impacts from climate change and natural disasters. So this item comes from a section of the Portland Plan with a number of initiatives on building a diverse economy, economic growth targets, highlight coordination and opportunities, and calling out important local strengths that support economic growth. So I'd say this specific item is really about coordination and evaluating your existing businesses through the lens of climate change and other natural disasters. So an example of this I recently heard comes from Vancouver, BC, where their economic development practitioners are part of their emergency command center for natural disasters or climate-related events. In preparation, they've met with their businesses. They talk about climate change impacts with them, and they have a business recovery plan. And part of that plan is tiering the importance of each business following a climate change event or natural disaster, so that when they're working on their recovery, they kind of know where to put their efforts. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of an example of doing this, really just looking at your business community through the lens of climate change and natural disasters.
And as Austin mentioned earlier, I think a lot of strategies around resilience and climate change will come from the Climate Action Plan as well, that we will incorporate into the Salem project.
So maybe while folks are voting here, we can speak to the question about how the term equitable is defined. Eunice, do you want to maybe speak to that?
Sure, I'm not sure that we have defined equitable as part of that policy idea, but I think generally we're trying to think broadly about specific needs of specific communities and ensuring that that we're considering them and addressing them, and understanding also like who benefits and who potentially is burdened by choices that we make, whether it's an investment choice or an incentive versus or just decisions that we make in the planning world and in economic development. So I think it's a pretty broad lens that we're trying to take when it comes to equity. And I know we've had a lot of discussions around equity, and I would say that I have looked at the work, obviously that the Urban Development Department is doing, and they are taking a really proactive approach to equity and economic development in their work in the strategy update that they're doing.
All right, should we keep moving, Seth?
Sure, yeah, we can go to number 3. So the third one was on competitive advantages. So strengthen Salem's competitive economic advantages, including a high quality workforce, business diversity, business climate, and multimodal infrastructure. So I would say, competitive advantages are the items that your city is doing better than others already. It's sort of what you're naturally gifted at for whatever reason. So I'd say this item is really maintain and strengthen the city's comparative economic advantages, including that access to high quality workforce. So those are the ones that Portland picked, but I think it's basically for us looking at what are the things that we're really good at and making sure that we're playing to those strengths. And I think here we have, food processing, agriculture, food tech, timber products, someone referred to as, government, healthcare, things like that. So yes, we can go to the voting on that. And A is yes, you're in favor of this. B is no, I'm sorry, and then C is unsure. Did anyone want to talk about that one?
What's a business climate? Is that businesses that support workers, or is that, you know, like businesses that are just paying minimum wage?
I would think that business climate is more not so much specific, and I think it can be pro or con. You can have a negative business climate or a positive business climate. I think it's more so just like, what is your business mood, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
No.
I think you can also include kind of the relationship between the city and businesses, right? So I think we're pretty supportive city in terms of supporting businesses, because oftentimes there could be, for example, a climate or a community that maybe isn't as supportive. I mean, we can always do more, but that's the way I had thought about it.
Right. So the idea here is having like a welcoming business climate. I would say that that's a place where businesses find it easy to work with your government. It's friction free. Yeah, it's an easy place for business to happen. There are incentives for you to go. So I could say you could have a positive business climate, or you could have a poor business climate, depending on what that relationship is with their local businesses.
It's hard to make decisions on some of these because they're so broad and include so many things. Like, I want multimodal infrastructure, but I also don't want to give tax breaks to businesses that are going to exploit workers.
That's fair. That makes sense. So, you know, we do have to sort of think at a fairly high level, because these are policies that will stay with the city for, you know, potentially the next 20 years. And so we don't want to get too specific, and we do have plans that support the comprehensive plan where more specificity is appropriate. So you're right. Some of these maybe are vague, and maybe that feedback is valuable because it helps us craft a more readily understandable policy in the end. So, you know, I appreciate that feedback. And if you're feeling like it's a little too vague to make an informed vote, let us know and we'll do our best to help clarify.
And you're welcome to, oh.
I was just gonna say, and I think, you know, part of this meeting is a lot of community outreach has already been done, like Eunice, by your team, and you've put together, I think, a pretty good list of policies that have, you know, more or less approval. And then this meeting was looking at a bunch of other ideas to make sure nothing was missed. So I think, yeah, bringing it to this group and saying, hey, we saw this, we don't have it included, we haven't really talked about it. What does the community think? I think that feedback that we received is great, of saying, well, this is kind of vague and I can't be completely sure about it or not. And I think that's what we're hoping to get out of this meeting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Seth. And I think also, if there are portions that you like, for example, you like the multimodal infrastructure, you're welcome to drop that in the chat. We are going to keep the chat, put the chat online, and use the chat as input as well. So if you want to kind of clarify what you like and don't like about these, if you pick unsure, or even if you pick you like it or don't, that would be great.
So as you can see, a lot of people were unsure about this one, so that's good feedback to get. Thank you.
I think what might be a little confusing on this one too is that it's coming from a Portland policy, and I think some of those items were specific to Portland's benefits or their advantages. So it might have been like a little bit of a translation issue too, that it just doesn't fit Salem in the same way.
All right, let's keep going.
So sharing economy encourage mechanisms that enable excess capacity in goods and services to be utilized, including peer-to-peer transactions, crowdfunding, and borrowing and renting platforms. So I thought this was kind of a fun one because, you know, this is really about embracing and encouraging the sharing economy. In the past, I think we've seen a number of communities that can be kind of resistant, thinking about fights against like drive share programs, Uber, Lyft, hesitance about scooters, wariness around Airbnb. So I think here it's saying like the sharing economy though can also be a great place for gig workers or entrepreneurship. When you think of like crowdfunding is now becoming almost a somewhat conventional way for entrepreneurs to start raising initial capital. So yeah, looking at like the multimodal shift that originally we saw concerns about Ubers and scooters and all these items, and that they might hurt public transit. And I think now you're starting to see public transit agencies looking at how can we incorporate these other forms of transportation into the larger transportation network. Yeah, so that's what I have to say on that. So I'm curious to see what people have on this one. So is it A is yes for that, B is no, and C is if you're unsure of kind of encouraging the sharing economy? I think I would add here too, a lot of the sharing economy is sort of like business to individuals, but also in this like business to business world, you start to see, I think like live work would fall into this realm, incentives on permit facilitation on shared food tech places. So how can like our businesses share spaces is another way to think about it.
All right, let's keep going. Oh, I do see one question there. Do we have time for that? Would the city run or encourage businesses to run a tool share or support a time bank platform?
What is a time bank platform?
A time bank is where people kind of advertise their skills and then they exchange different things based on their skills.
Okay.
And they kind of bank hours.
Okay. That's cool. I hadn't heard that term before. I don't know. I haven't been with the city for that long. Have we ever talked about doing like a tool share program at the city level?
Not that I'm aware of. The county has a program that kind of they've moved around, kind of a mobile tool sharing and repairing. I think it's actually focused on repairing tools where you could bring tools or things that need to be repaired and can do that. So I know that Marion County Economic Development or Environmental Services has been exploring areas here. I'm not aware that the city has anything or currently or has explored that in the past.
But I think that fits into this type of policy. All right, let's keep rolling.
So for import substitution, so it's encouraging local goods production and service delivery that can substitute for imports to help keep money in the local economy. This is, I think, an interesting one that's really gained more popularity since the pandemic, and really goes against, mainstream thinking on supply chains for some time. We've very much been heading towards a more global market. In preparation for this, I was looking at this and I read that on average, a car built in Mexico, the average part crosses the border 8 different times. Each part is like going back and forth and the changes. So I think like the pandemic has certainly showed the vulnerability of that supply chain, or other items like a container ship being caught in a canal, really how vulnerable this global supply chain is. So I think for this item, those are some bigger examples, but I think this would really be about starting small, bring our local businesses together, understanding their supply chains and seeing if there are others in the community that can be matched with that. And a great example of this that just happened recently is Yamasa Corporation. Has been a major sauce manufacturer in the Willamette Valley since the mid-90s. They create a lot of Asian sauces here in Salem. And this year, they started an experiment with a local farm, Redunclo Farms, to grow, it was grow red wheat, which is something they need in their products. So they started with a test sample site, made a test line of products, and it worked. So now they are going to be having part of their supply chain is going to be local. So I think having more examples like that would be great. We can vote on that one. Did anyone want to talk about that one at all? And Professor Lorenzen, I'm enjoying your comments. If you want to jump in and talk and not just put in the chat, I think that would be great.
Well, I think the example that you gave of the sauce that requires, kind of local agriculture is a good one. But I do worry about, kind of where producing industries are located in Salem and where that kind of air pollution is going and it's not being an equitable distribution. So we would need to think about, kind of like what kind of pollution that production is creating and where we're putting it in Salem. And, we might get into kind of the like not in my backyard issues and things like that. So again, this one's really broad. I mean, I think the idea of local has been really, a little romanticized as if it's always 100% positive. But you do have to kind of get into the details and think about both the pros and the cons.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment.
All right, it looks like we've got our votes. Should we keep going?
So the next one is disparity reduction. So encourage public efforts to reduce racial, ethnic, and disability-related disparities in income and employment opportunity. So this came from the equitable household prosperity section of the Portland Plan, and was one item in that area. So I would think of this as looking at employment opportunities, which may include targeted training, apprenticeship programs, internships, disability support, where that might be, equipment training, or gap, basically anywhere there's a gap that need to be filled. I know there's some programs that are out there existing where you might have like a public agency or a nonprofit will pay like a portion of a wage for individuals. And then I would say, just in general, we've talked about the upcoming city's economic development strategy plan, and I think diversity, equity, inclusion plays a pretty prominent role in that plan. And I think really just starting with evaluating our programs that we currently have and seeing if there are changes that we can make for those to have more equitable outcomes, or really like what gaps in service are currently existing in Salem. Vote on it. So yeah, if you're in favor, it's A, no, B, C, unsure.
Seth, we had a question asking, what can the city actually do on this?
So as I said, there are some programs if it's just like filling like wage gaps or something in that area. I think some of the things that we've talked about with others is, for example, we have like incentive programs that already exist. So one thing we've seen other communities do with like the enterprise zones, which have incentives based on employment numbers. But so far it's just based on, you have to increase employment by a certain amount. Some communities are starting to say, you know, we want to see some like DEI metrics occurring. There would be further incentives if your hires are like meeting the diversity of the community and things like that. So there certainly are things to be doing on this. I think for us, one of our first steps is really evaluating our own programs and seeing how we're doing.
And I'm seeing some ideas presented in the chat as well. That's great. We're definitely keeping an eye on those, and we'll use that feedback. Thank you.
And I think to the question about implementation, I think that's spot on. We're going to try to develop an implementation strategy as part of the Our Salem project that would really prioritize what are the next steps we would take to implement some of these policies. Obviously, we can't have an action for every policy right away. So kind of looking at what are the strategies, but I think we have a leg up in terms of economic development because there is that economic development strategy that's being crafted right now. But we do plan to look at implementation as part of this project.
So the next one is on campus institutions, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but this provides for stability and growth of major campus institutions as essential service providers, centers of innovation, workforce development resources, and major employers. So these, think of like the Capitol Mall, Salem Health Hospital campus, some other major campuses in the community. And I think really the idea here is universities I think would fit in this as well, that we kind of often in cities like think of this as being sort of its own separate thing within the community. And I think it's switching the mind of thinking of considering that these are really employment hubs, innovation hubs, and considering the long-term needs that those areas are going to have going forward and really developing around them in a strategic way. So yeah, if you're in favor of that, A is in favor, B is not in favor, and C is unsure. Do you want to flip back to the, yeah, thanks. Did anyone have any comments on the campus institutions item?
Again, I think it's a matter of, how do they treat their workforce? Do they employ locally? Kind of things that we've already talked about.
The details, right? Like, what does this actually start to look like? Yeah, and I think it's just a challenge because a lot of these are pretty high level.
This is Jim. I think it's a two-way street. I mean, the city can do a lot for these campus institutions, but what are they doing for us? And a good example is Salem Health has free parking, which we know is a bad thing. State government, we asked them to do more staggered work hours and things like that, and we don't get much, we don't seem to get enough cooperation. So I just think it has to go both ways.
Yeah, I think there are things that you give up, right? And if like a government building or something like that, it's not paying taxes. Those are not paying property taxes, and a lot of times these are in like centrally located places. So maybe you're losing some tax money there, but then also they tend to be an anchor of other development. So other development comes around and it may increase the property taxes for the properties around it. So yeah, I completely agree with you, Jim. It's, as you said earlier too, it's a double-edged sword. It really does come down to how these things are implemented.
Right, a lot of folks unsure on that one.
So the next idea is business innovation. So this is facilitating scale up and business innovation opportunities where new businesses can benefit from co-location, proximity to transit, affordable space, mentorship, and shared services. So I think supporting entrepreneurs and helping traded sector businesses to scale up, I think this is something that is happening in Salem. My team that's here, Annie and Tori, are absolutely involved in this on a daily basis. It might not be up to the scale as larger communities, but I think it's definitely happening. And then we have some local businesses and partners who are working on this too. I think of co-working spaces like Gray Lab. Parallel 45, I think, is a good space for kind of starting off businesses. We've just started an angel fund in this last year. There was a $50,000 angel fund that was available. 2 businesses starting up. The Salem Brewery District was established a little over a year ago now, I believe. So that's kind of like branding an area and helping those businesses to grow. It's that idea of co-location, bring these places together and you start to get that sector growth and you start to get some cluster growth coming after that. So I think that's definitely like happening here, and I think it'll continue to be a focus for us for sure. So we're going to go to the voting on that right now.
Seth, somebody wondered, how do we as a community get the best bang for the public dollar when allocating funds to support true economic development?
Do you want to clarify the question a little bit? I mean, in terms of like, where does that dollar go? Like infrastructure to employment,
Yes, the incentive, this is EM here, the incentive is we have all these policies, we have limited resources, we're thinking of using some of those resources. We've heard discussion, explanation of how some of those resources are used, but the question then becomes, how do we as a community make decisions that are wise decisions as to the expenditures of those funds? I'll give you an urban renewal district example. In West Salem, there was someone who wanted to develop a sports medical project, and funds from the city were allocated to that in a constructive way. That meant a service that hadn't been in West Salem received support for a business that I do believe is providing economic services in the Polk County part of our community.
Yeah, that's a great question. Tori or Annie, do you want to jump in on this and then I can come in with some follow-up ideas?
Hi, EM. I think, that's where the community can, the annual budget review and conversation can occur. That is a public process and an opportunity to provide feedback. Certainly our advisory committees that are active in those urban renewal areas, including West Salem, where we have our grant and loan, now just grant programs, are ways that, again, they can weigh in on our budgets, how we're, in our recommendations to the Urban Renewal Agency and how we're recommending that use of urban renewal dollars, as well as our policies or guidelines around our grant programs. So, how those are currently written, what kinds of things are eligible. And then I think maybe that also goes back to one of the other policies that was presented today around equity and possibly reviewing, looking at how our programs are described and who's benefiting from them now, and is that being done? Are those programs accessible to all as they are intended? So that would be my comment. I think it's something that we certainly can have more conversation about, and as well with the council and the Urban Renewal Agency.
Yeah, I'd say just in general, I think a lot of economic development drivers are looking at like traded sector industries, right? So those that are bringing money into the economy, with the idea being that anytime they're using public money to leverage private money to increase your traded sector businesses, that tends to be good economic development, generally speaking. And then with the idea being that if you have a good amount of traded sector businesses bringing money into the economy, bringing good, good paying jobs, then that money will circulate through the economy, and that'll support your more service sector businesses. Anyone else want to talk about that one?
I think we got to keep rolling just for the sake of time, Seth.
Great. So this is the last one. So it's minimizing commercial parking requirements, monitor commercial parking needs, and set minimum requirements at the lowest level necessary. I knew a really smart person once, and they said, really, when it comes down to it, everything is about parking. So it's a focal, whenever parking is talked about, it leads to an interesting conversation. I think the idea here basically is especially in downtown areas, small scale commercial areas, transit, areas that are served by transit, it's really rethinking the parking requirements that you have, and can you find ways to reduce the amount of parking that you have in spaces. And just thinking, in high property value areas, those parking spot, saving space just for parking is pretty expensive to do. So we're voting on that one now, if people want to jump in. And Austin, there's some like really good comments in chat. What's been the practice for that? Do you save those in a way?
Yeah, we're
Yes.
We're keeping track of all of that. We'll post the chat discussion online after the meeting, and we're definitely taking all those comments into consideration. Thanks. All right, let's keep going. Thanks everybody for your thoughtful comments on that one.
So this is where we just wanted to see if there's other ideas you all had that maybe hasn't come up in our vision document to date or hasn't been discussed today that you think we should consider. Feel free to drop it in the chat. And then just for the sake of time, I'm going to just kind of move on and then we'll circle back to the chat for other ideas. So we're doing a lot of outreach going forward on these policies. This is one avenue, these weekly policy meetings. But we also have a survey online in English and in Spanish that is out there now. We're also going to a lot of community organizations to talk to them specifically about different policy areas of interest that they have. So we'll be doing that over the next couple of months, and then incorporating that feedback to add new policies and revise existing draft policies. And then we'll present that back to the community and hopefully adopt everything by the end of the year with an updated comprehensive plan. So this is just the timeline to show kind of where we are. And again, we hope to bring everything through the adoption process by the end of the year. And this is just my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions or comments. And also, if you want to check our website, we are constantly adding information there on how to be engaged in the project. And if there's any organization that you have that you're affiliated with and you want us to come specifically to that organization and talk, we are happy to do that. I just want to touch really quickly on the other aspects of the project that's not the policies. We are planning to launch an interactive map that will show proposed zoning across the community, and hopefully this month. So you'll be able to look at the proposal and give comments on the different ideas. We also have a City Council Planning Commission zoning subcommittee that's going to be focused specifically on reducing greenhouse gas emissions through code changes. And we just sent out an email today about that. The first meeting of that subcommittee is going to be April 30th. So if you go to our project website, you can see how to participate, how to provide comments. The public is invited to attend those and participate. And now that there's a little bit of time, I'm going to go back up through the chat and let's see. This one from Portland was interesting. What does it mean fiscally stable city? Promote a high citywide jobs to household ratio that supports tax revenue growth at pace with residential demand for municipal services. So you're asking for clarification. What does that mean? So I'm not sure that. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Very interesting, but I'm not sure what it means.
So some cities look at having kind of a balanced, like one job to every household or two jobs for every household, and this is looking at, ensuring that we have enough jobs for the households that are here. I think our community is a little different than Portland and others, where we have a lot of people commuting in and commuting out, which is something we've talked a lot about. But I think generally the goal is to have enough jobs here for people who live here. Feel free to jump in, anyone, if you'd like to. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, but I think it's a real problem that we have so many people that work here and don't live here, and they're free riders on our city services, and something has to be done about that. I'd be in favor of a payroll tax for those people that don't live here because they're free riders.
Yeah, and the council did consider that at one point, and I think we pulled it given the whole COVID situation. I'm not sure when the council, or if the council is going to revisit that.
No, that proposal was a payroll tax on everybody. It wasn't just for people that didn't.
Okay. Thanks for that. Yep.
I don't think
it
should be a payroll tax on people that live here. They're already paying city taxes, but we need to tax the people that don't live here.
Okay. There's also a comment here about hubs, mass transit, encouraging pedestrian bicycles key to minimize the use of cars and reduce pollution. And I think that is something that we're looking at both through our Salem and the Climate Action Plan. How can we promote all of that? So stay tuned. Did I miss anything? Mentorship program for women, especially women of color, into building trades as an idea. That goes, I guess, along with the comment previously about specifically supporting businesses for women and people of color. Did I miss anything? Oh, Annie, do you want to go ahead and share about the economic development strategy?
We've referenced it a few times today, so I just wanted to let those know that are interested. On April 26th, we have an informational staff report going to council, so you can read those reports online, typically the Thursday before, with an initial draft outline of some of the key themes and actions that we're recommending in the economic development strategy update. So that will in some ways serve as the implementation side of things, but it's really a short-term strategy really focused on COVID-19 recovery, economic recovery for our community, and certainly with a huge focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. So just wanted to point that out for those that have interest.
Great. Are there any last comments or questions? We'll be doing this again at 5:30 if you want to come back. And I also just want to thank Annie and Seth and Austin and Tori, the whole team. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Eunice and crew, you did a very good job today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.